Every great civilization eventually faces the same inevitable end. The language fades, the religion is forgotten, and the greatest cities are buried under centuries of dirt and silence. It is a nearly universal law of history. But for the last 2.5 millennia, one geographic region has stubbornly defied that law. This is the Iranian Plateau, 1,000,000 square miles of salt deserts and arid plains, guarded by the massive Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges. Because of its position at the crossroads of the ancient world, this land was a magnet for devastating military campaigns. Greeks trampled it from the west, Arab armies swept up from the south, and Mongol hordes tore through from the east. These invaders burned the libraries, slaughtered entire populations, and erased ruling dynasties from history. The physical structures of the empire were frequently reduced to ash and broken pillars. Yet, the civilization survived. It didn't survive by endlessly repelling its invaders, but by culturally absorbing them, taking their customs, religions, and languages, and reshaping them into something distinctly Iranian. In 330 BCE, the mighty Achaemenid Empire fell to a 20-year-old Macedonian king. Alexander the Great marched his highly disciplined army deep into the Persian heartland, burning the ceremonial capital of Persepolis to the ground. He won the military victory, but the deeper he pushed into the territory, the more he adopted local royal dress and court rituals. Within a few short years, Alexander was marrying a local princess and requiring his own Greek generals to follow Persian customs. After his death, his successors built Greek-style cities and made Greek the language of administration. But out in the rural villages, the Zoroastrian fire temples kept burning. The native Iranian identity was preserved quietly, passing from one generation to the next. The Greek occupation remained a surface-level victory. That quietly preserved identity provided the exact foundation needed for the Parthian and Sasanian empires to eventually rise and reclaim their status as global superpowers. 4 centuries later, a new force swept out of the southern deserts. In the 7th century, Arab tribes rapidly dismantled the Sasanian state, bringing a new religion and a new system of government through total conquest. Defeated on the battlefield, the Iranians responded by making themselves indispensable to the new administration. Within a few generations, Persian scholars and bureaucrats had secured key positions inside the Abbasid Caliphate, running the massive empire's internal machinery. During this period, the poet Ferdowsi spent 30 years writing a 60,000-verse epic called the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings. He documented the ancient myths and history of his people, resurrecting the Persian language just as it was being marginalized. The religion was new, and the ruling class was Arab, but the administrative brain and the cultural soul of the empire had become irrevocably Iranian. The harshest test arrived in the 13th century. Genghis Khan and the Mongol armies unleashed a scale of violence that wiped entire cities off the map. They destroyed millions of lives and wrecked the underground irrigation networks that the region's agriculture depended on. But even this destruction eventually bowed to local influence. Within a few generations, the Mongol rulers converted to Islam and became the greatest patrons of Persian art and architecture, funding the very masterpieces they had once threatened to erase. Following the fragmentation and violence of the Timurid era, the Safavid dynasty emerged to unify the population. In 1501, they declared Shia Islam the official state religion, creating a distinct spiritual and political border that separated Iran from its neighboring empires. This forced transition created a unique religious identity that acted as a new, invisible fortress. It unified the people against outside powers and ensured that the civilization would remain distinct, regardless of who held the throne. In the 20th century, the threats shifted from military hordes to global geopolitics. During the Great Game between the British and Russian empires, Iran was treated as a strategic buffer state, slowly losing its sovereignty to foreign interventions. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi attempted to counter this decline with aggressive modernization. He poured oil revenue into infrastructure and Western-style education, but relied on an authoritarian state apparatus to suppress political opposition. In 1951, the Iranian parliament moved to nationalize the oil industry under Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. This brief attempt at economic independence was crushed 2 years later by a Western-backed coup, a moment that fueled deep national resentment.
By 1979, the combination of cultural frustration and political repression erupted. A unified movement of students, workers, and religious clerics brought down the 2,500-year-old monarchy. The revolution resulted in a complete merger of political and religious authority. Under Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran became a theocratic republic where religious institutions took direct control of the state. Despite these cycles of coups and revolutions, the everyday rhythm of the Iranian people remains. The language spoken in the markets and the poetry read in homes is part of a cultural continuity that has outlasted every government in its history. If you look deep into the soul of modern Iran, past the headlines and the shifting political borders, you can still hear the ancient echoes of Cyrus and Darius. Empires are temporary. They rise, expand, and eventually turn to ash. But a civilization that knows how to bend and absorb its enemies achieves a form of immortality that military power alone can never reach.